what we then started to think about is, okay, well, look, it's AI as a feature is pretty simple because that's kind of platform. But then we were thinking, okay, well, what do you need to put in place to start constructing AI as a role? And what we wanted to try and map out was, well, what's the kind of core system architecture that you're going to need to kind of build or have in place in order to start building kind of that intelligent decisioning system. And look, we totally recognize that there are, you'll start to see that there's agent tech out there like Make and NAN. There's platforms that people are building, which are building sort of specific transactional services that AI is performing. The one that we were kind of more interested in is, okay, well, what's going to be, how do you use AI for the kind of high value, complex human processes that require AI humans, and it has to be kind of a like conversation interface about how you're orchestrating really complex high value process. How we deliver projects, how we deliver services doesn't feel like you can automate that in a kind of single agent transaction. It feels like it's going to need to be multi-agent, but also what's critical is the role and the relationship between the human and the AI assistant and how they interact and how they interact with teams.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we don't want to give the impression that when we talk about AI agents talking to other AI agents, that what we're imagining is a very sort of opaque, completely automated, the AI is just making decisions with no kind of oversight, with no kind of human intervention. You know, all of this is, you know, I mean, I'm jumping ahead to the last point on this slide here, but the human in the loop interface of, you can see what other agents is your AI talking to, what information is it getting from them, what is it asking them to do, how is it coming to the decisions that it's coming to, and obviously all the necessary kind of manual sign off and verification of anything the AI is producing.
Yeah, I mean, so look, I think the first one we were going to talk about, like the process engine, and when we were talking about the process engine, we think there's got to be something that is bounding both the human and the AI in what the process is, like the end to end, left to right. How are we going to go deliver this project left to right? There has to be something that is basically framing that and bounding it, for the AI to kind of understand it, but also for the kind of human to see it and interact with it and have dialogue about, well, how do we see that process shaping up and taking place? And I think for us, when we look at Method Grid, for us, that feels like a really strong area where we think actually the kind of playbook concept would be a good solution for the process engine, given that it's kind of, again, being quite visual, mapping it out, the kind of visual playbook, but also then kind of merging kind of knowledge and allowing AI to interact with it and interface with it and say, well, like, by the way, I think this is why I've done X and why I've done Y, and basically using the playbook as a way of facilitating that process conversation between the user and the machine, basically. And I think this is the other concept, probably puts Method Grid clients in a easier step to migrate to it. I can't see a world where the kind of, we have this one process, it's written down static, we want people to follow it. I can't see that surviving like 2 or 3 years. I think we're going to have to evolve, or AI will help us evolve to it, where, you know, AI will chat to us, have a few questions. Look, what's your risk rating? Tell me a bit more about your project. Okay, great, I understand X, Y, and Z. And then it's going to try and then dynamically go, by the way, okay, you're kind of, you need these stages, you need these decision gates, you need these additional deliverables. But it's basically helping the user kind of codify and define that kind of way of working in that project lifecycle, but dynamically. And I can't see a static SharePoint sort of meeting the kind of requirements for that.
Yeah, and I think sort of that's sort of the core of Method Grid, right? It's this kind of tension almost, or kind of balance between the structured, these are the steps you need to do, these are the common processes that all of our projects have, but then understanding the context is different for each individual project, and there's going to be some bits of it that need to be refined per project, essentially, or based on circumstances.
Was it you did a little prototype on that where I think we were doing project classification using AI, and then AI, as you cloned the playbook, AI had started to kind of adjust and dynamically add additional elements, deliverables.
Yeah. So we had, I mean, I'd maybe call it a prototype, is slightly generous. It was sort of an initial proof of concept, certainly. It was around sort of Rail project is what we were playing around with, where we had sort of Rail kind of upgrade playbook, and then it was around having a conversation with the AI when you're deploying it for a specific project, of giving it more context about the project. I think there were, if we said to it, this is a project that is happening in some remote mountain up in Scotland versus this other project that's right in the middle of central London, it would be able to intelligently look at the project and go, okay, this element isn't necessary for this one, or there's going to be some logistical challenges for this one that's in the middle of nowhere that we need to consider. There's bigger risks to, say, maintaining service levels within the central London one. And it was exactly that. It was taking not a complete blank page. It was taking the existing structure and the existing kind of regulations and gates and all the rest of it that you have, and tweaking it for the context of an individual project.
But I think for me, that's for what I think the future of work is going to look like, where actually work will, using AI, and will start to be dynamically shaped, and you will have access to an assistant helping you do that. I think the next bit, the kind of intelligent agent, and I think what we said is, look, we don't see this as just one agent. I think clearly it comes back to your point, Mark, about the human in the loop interface. You kind of want to make sure that staff have, the worst case, I'm talking to this agent and this system, talking to that agent and that system. It's kind of like, you probably just get frustrated. Why aren't they talking to each other? I think the intelligent agent is, okay, we've built specific agents that are performing particular roles, and based on the interaction that I have with the user, there's something that's working out and saying, well, actually, I'm going to push and route that through to that agent to get that response, and then feed it back to the user. And I think we'll come on to probably that in a bit more detail. We've had a go at what we think is what's the kind of capital project delivery agent to help us kind of build out future prototypes for that.
Yeah, I think it's about, this is sort of the key point, you've already mentioned it, but it's about ownership, right, of the AI model. If you have your own AI model and it knows about these other systems, it knows what information it can get from these different systems, it knows what it can ask these different systems to do for you, and then it can kind of form its own plan of, I need to get this information from this system, I then need to ask this other system to do this, and it can keep you in the loop of all of those steps as it's going through.
I think that's kind of that kind of orchestration logic layer as well, which I think clients are going to have to work through, which is, okay, I think we're used to humans triggering AI. I give you a prompt and I want you to do something. I think naturally what we will start to see is, okay, somebody's created a change request in like the CDE, or they created something in Procore, I've raised a change here. Actually, that then signals and creates other kind of agents to interact and respond to it, and then respond to users. Or potentially you'll start to see patterns in data that will be triggering agents to surface that to users. And I think that kind of orchestration and logic layer is going to be quite key, because I think we're going to evolve beyond just the human chatting with AI and interacting with it to much more that agents are independent and being triggered by different trigger points in applications or specific data conditions.
Yeah, like I say, I think those, as we kind of move to this multi-agent kind of system, the thing that one AI agent is reacting to might have happened in a completely different system. An AI in one system might just sort of broadcast, this is a change that has happened, and then an AI in a completely different system might pick that up and go, okay, that means I now need to kick in and do this other thing in the system I'm responsible for.
Yeah. And then the integration sort of data fabric. I think I think everyone knows like the core project data challenge, like that you want kind of consistent data captured in a core way. But I think also you look at most like capital project delivery environments, there's kind of, oh, Bentley's got this data set in kind of requirements, hazards, risks, Procore, CDE's got all of this, the kind of design documentation, Risk Connect's got all our risks, Method Grid's got the assurance and the kind of knowledge. I think it's going to be probably less about what the system actually is, but it's really how good you are at basically pushing that into a kind of common fabric of data that AI can have access to, because I think that will essentially limit and determine just how much it can actually do, especially if you kind of want machine learning put on that data set to kind of identify patterns, and then have machine learning kind of push and into the orchestration layer and actually saying, by the way, I've detected this pattern, I think you need to do something, agent. I don't know, the change control agent. I think I've detected an unscheduled change. I think you should investigate it.
Yeah, I think as well, data not just the data that your kind of AI agent has access to, but data that you own as well. Rather than the data living in each of these individual platforms, the data living with you that your AI has access to, and it can then bring that knowledge to all of the different systems it interacts with.
Yeah, I think that'll push. I think it's already there, but I think that'll place a much stronger focus on clients ensuring that systems provide access to the data, but then essentially probably what we will see is clients then start and say, well, look, what kind of machine learning capability do I need to put in place on top of that data set? Yeah. And then the knowledge and reasoning piece, I think this is going to be quite critical. And I think, I mean, we're starting it with source grounding, but essentially this is where you want to contain the language model to have knowledge about your process, your standards, your procedures, in order to basically bind it to your organization. I think without that, you've just got a rogue LMS language model just spurting out stuff that's kind of not, I'm not going to say tuned or fine tuned, but certainly you want to ground it and give it organizational context of how you want it to behave.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we were having an interesting conversation before as well about kind of industry level knowledge versus your kind of organizational knowledge. And yeah, I think you were saying we're probably not too far away from kind of industry bodies or kind of governments providing regulations and providing this sort of knowledge in a form that AI can easily understand, so that everyone's kind of own AI agents can kind of take from those kind of public repositories and add it to your own organizational knowledge that your AI has access to.
I think as well, I think that a lot of the providers, let's say a lot of the provider platforms now, they'll connect to, similar to us, what we're OpenAI, Microsoft Azure hosted in the UK. That's the language model we use for AI features. But you can imagine a world where, well, if you've got different platforms all accessing different instances of language models, you mean, hang on, I've got like a haberdashery of models that we're dependent on. And what we've seen is, as we iterate and launch new versions of the model, like going from 3.5 to 4, the behavior changes, significantly. Timing and responding is another thing, but actually the behavior and its response changes. And I think if you don't have control over what language models you want to use and that influence kind of your AI roles, some supplier changes one language model, suddenly the kind of behavior or the decision it starts to make is kind of, hang on, why is it started to do that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's not. Yeah, because I think generally, the more you use AI, there's a skill to using an AI model. Essentially, the more you use it, the more you kind of learn how it's going to respond to you and how to prompt it to do certain things. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I think as you use specific AI model more, you kind of learn more of its kind of eccentricities. You kind of build up an intuition about how it's going to respond. You almost build up some rapport with it almost. You know how it's going to respond to certain things you say. And yeah, you're absolutely right. If you then switch to use a different model, or the platform you're using changes what AI model it's kind of using in the background, then yeah, it's quite jarring to suddenly, why is it not doing the things it normally does when I give it this prompt? And it's not necessarily that it'll be wrong now. It's just different from what you've become accustomed to, and you now need to relearn all of the specifics about how this new AI model responds to things. So in the world we're kind of imagining, where you're bringing your own AI model or your organization's AI model to these different platforms, you're bringing that knowledge you have of the AI model you're using with you. So you don't need to relearn how all of these different AI models work. You're not at the whims of whatever.
I think that's it. I think what we'll see is, I don't think clients will like to be at the whim of platforms. I think they'll say, look, great that you've got it, but actually what we want you to do is we want your AI features and functionality to run off our language model, because we've done X, and that's our preference. We want you to connect to that. I think that's the big shift for us, is in the platform is, okay, well, we need to provide clients the features to be able to change the keys and plug it into any type of AI language model, and then you're kind of independent. I think that's what clients will want. It'll be great, you've got it shared, but actually no, we want you to be specific, and it's our language model that we want.
Like where one client, where you're using Copilot, we use that for everything, and we as a platform then need to be able to talk to their Copilot. Another client, we're using Claude, we need to be able to talk to their Claude model, and kind of advertise to each of those models, here's how you interact with MethodGrid, here's the features that you can use within MethodGrid. To exactly as you say, to allow everyone to kind of bring their own AI model and all of the knowledge that it brings with it to MethodGrid, rather than the other way around.
And I think then that probably brings us on the other kind of human in the loop interface, and that's the bit I think is it's important. It's the hard one to judge, but I think we, as a platform provider, I think we've got to support both kind of operations, which is could you use MethodGrid as the primary interface that people are chatting to and working through, and it's kind of connected to broader agents, but essentially you're providing users a single interface for how they're delivering projects, and it's just connected, but you're interacting with it. There's a kind of thing, yes, that's probably potentially a reality, because if it's MethodGrid is the process engine and it's facilitating the dialogue, maybe it's got 80% of the chat interactions because it's helping you with the process. However, we can't kind of rest our laurels on that, because I still believe there'll be well, actually, no, I don't want MethodGrid to be the primary interface. We want Copilot, or we want some other system to be the primary interface that users are using to interact with AI. And what we just want you to do is that if I'm talking with that primary interface, it can connect to MethodGrid and do stuff within MethodGrid just as much as it could go and do something with Procore or go and do something with CMAR, and it be the kind of single interface. But I think regardless of what you pick, I think what we're going to say is that most clients, or most people in most organizations, are going to want to try and provide a single interface to AI, rather than I'm talking to this one, I'm talking to that one, I've got to use this system for that one, this one. Then you just, like I said before, you just can get frustrated at the fact that they can't talk with each other, or actually I've got to talk to this one slightly this way and talk to that one slightly this way. It's kind of actually what I need is a kind of single interface that we can provide employees.
And I think, as we sort of said before, the important point as well is an interface to have oversight over what the AI is doing and any decisions it's making and what data it's using, and also to kind of sign off, because there's different categories of risk when it comes to using AI for things, right? There's going to be some fairly low risk things where it's like you're pretty sure the AI is going to get it right, but if it doesn't, it also kind of doesn't matter too much. But then there's going to be some very high risk categories of we absolutely do not want an AI agent just making its own decisions here without very clear, human sign off and verification of where it's got all the data from that it's doing this with. I think there's going to be different levels of that human interface, I think, as well, depending on the risk and how likely it is the AI is going to get things right or wrong.
I think as well, there's the human machine relationship, which is you want the concept of AI as a role, but if the human has to interact with AI and it doesn't feel like it's a single backwards and forwards interaction, it's like, well, you go for that bit for that role, that bit for that role. They'll never kind of trust it or believe that it's kind of core functioning as a role. It's just a haberdashery of collected features that I'm trying to chat and interact with.
Yeah, I think you've just touched on another key point as well there about trust, right? You don't want to just use it. It almost doesn't matter how good AI is or how good these different agents are if people don't trust that it's making those decisions. And yeah, if you're bringing your own AI model to the table that you use for everything else, it's kind of your key interface with all of these different AI systems. And yeah, I definitely think that helps build that trust.